I want to take a look at the metals and mining sector. It's been a stealth sector. It's performing well. Most investors aren't paying attention to it. Some investors are and doing well with it. I want to take a look at its price performance characteristics in the past and take a look at where we are. I want to compare that to the S&P 500 and see if there's any possible signal that we should be watching out for. So let's take a look at the metals and mining sector. So if we take a look here at this graph here, this is going back to 1990 here. I want to take a look at this time period. This is 2002 to 2007. This period here, leading into 2007, 2008, was a period where the commodity sector in general did extremely well. Now, why did it do well? Well, after the tech wreck in 2000, investors all of a sudden said, hey, we're short of commodities. We need commodities. Who knew? And we saw the sector do extremely well because of the change in narrative. Well, there might be a little bit of a comparison taking place right now. We can talk about that in a different video, but there was just a refocus on commodities. But I do want to take a look at a couple things. First of all, we did see that peak happen, and when it happened, the metals and mining sector fell off really fast, which is a characteristic of this sector. We tend to see spikes happen with this sector. In a second, I want to take a look at what happened, its performance relative to the S&P 500 around this time. So we saw it go down, go right back up again shortly after as things start to work out. We saw it head lower. Well, if you take a look here in this time period here, we can see that after 2020, we saw this huge run for this sector. It's interesting, it really didn't go down that much relative to its past performance compared to how much it got drawdowns in 2020 when COVID was a thing taking place. We saw the sector do extremely well for quite some time. Here we are here, we're in this consolidation phase for the sector. The sector has been outperforming the S&P 500 here. We're looking for this breakout to take place. We don't know, it hasn't happened. Maybe we see it head lower here as well. It's performing well in 2025 and outperforming the S&P 500, but we have to be careful. Okay, so this graph shows the metals and mining sector once again, and in white, and then in green we've got the S&P 500. Now these performance lines don't have different axes. I'll show you the relative performance in just a second. But what we want to take a look at is the relative performance around the peaks. Okay, so I've drawn a blue line at the top of the peak for the metals and mining sector. Now, if it's important to note, look at the S&P 500 here in green. It had already started to turn lower. So there's a lot of hype happening with this sector here, and it continued to move higher despite the S&P 500 moving lower. This graph shows the metals and mining sector in white, and green again is the S&P 500. This graph down here shows the relative performance of the metals and mining sector compared to the S&P 500. When the purple line's moving higher like it did from really 2002 to 2007 coming into 2008, that's the metals and mining sector outperforming. You can see here that look at over time, the metals and mining sector has totally underperformed the S&P 500. And yet we saw this outperformance happen on a multi-year basis after the tech wreck. And if you take a look here, we did see the metals and mining sector underperform quite a while again, go up again, and then come back down. The relative move we've seen in 2005, sector's been actually performing quite well, but in the grand scheme of things, compared to the overall performance going all the way back here, is really small. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, the metals and mining sector has been performing well over the last while, but it could have a lot more to go because it really is on a relative basis, even over the last few years, relative to the S&P 500, really hasn't put in a strong performance. And if we do see the narrative where investors are switching out of some of the higher growth stocks, which it does have indications of that, this sector could continue to benefit. This graph shows the metals and mining sector here in the top panel, and this is the metals and mining sector relative to the S&P 500. I just zoomed in basically compared to the last graph. And you can see here the outperformance has taken place for the metals and mining sector in the last few months in the 2025. Now, this is interesting because it's not very often you see a strong performance for the metals and mining sector in the summer months. This is its weaker time period, and yet it's done extremely well relative to the S&P 500. This is a sign showing that investors are interested in this sector. So when a sector is performing really well, when it typically doesn't, it's showing some strength for that sector, which means that we could see it move even further from here. This is a seasonal graph of complements of my website, alphamountain.com. And we're looking at using XME for the metals and mining. We're looking at 2007 to 2024 here. So here we are. This is the month of September. And this is important here because it's the worst month on an average basis. That's the blue bar here. But look at the median. The median is actually above zero here. So what that means is we're getting a few times where when the sector is performing really poorly, it's really dragging down the averages. And when the market can perform poorly in September, when that happens, it'll show up through the metals and mining sector. So it's a little bit of a warning, really. If we do start to see really risk off, we could see the metals and mining sector start to underperform. But I do want to say that even if that happens, it doesn't take away from the longer term perspective that perhaps we're starting to see more of an interest in this sector because we have seen this stronger outperformance starting to take place in this weaker time period, even if we did see that pullback in September. So perhaps if we did see that happen, perhaps a little bit later on, we could see a better opportunity as we move into the stronger seasonal period for the metals and mining sector, which happens really starting in later October into November. Thank you very much for joining me today. Please like this video and subscribe. Thank you.